2.0 roll call.
We will start with Crump,
Here.
Kay Smith,
Here.
Mackard is absent, Rod Smith,
Here.
Schaefer,
Here.
and Weiner.
Here.
2.0 Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Motion to approve the minutes from the following meetings, July 8th, 2019, and regular council meeting, and June 10th, 2019, corrected minutes.
So moved.
First by Cody,
Second.
second by Rich. Any other corrections or anything on July? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 4.0 public hearings, none. 5.0 proclamations, none. 6.0 old business. 6.1 discussion and possible action on the third reading of ordinance vacating and conveying that portion of Cedar Street lying south of Cherry Street and north of Vine Street in the city of Anamosa.
So moved.
Second.
First by Rich, second by Kay. Any discussion? And it's a roll vote.
We will start with Kay Smith,
Yes.
Rod Smith,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Weiner,
Yes.
and Crump.
Yes.
6.2 discussion and possible action on proposal of agreed upon procedures for special audit.
I spoke with kind of our lead auditor, Adam Poley, today. It's his first day back in the office. So he had been caught up with Craig, who was the one present at our prior meeting, and I guess he kind of wanted to clarify that what's included in the packet is more of ideas, not so much a proposal. He really stressed that he wants to ensure that whatever you guys approve, you're actually satisfied by. So I mean, he doesn't just want you to accept what they propose unless it fits what you're looking for, and yeah, I guess he's just trying to make sure that they understand what you guys are wanting.
Well, I'll tell you, I talked to two different CPAs that I've known for a long time that I trust, and I read them their procedures to be performed, and both of them just kind of laughed at it. Said they're not doing what they really need to do. They're not doing digging far enough. They're just kind of sugarcoating it. So I think there needs to be more into this audit.
Are these, I guess my question is, do these guys do city audits all around, or are they just a CPA, or just, I mean?
They do municipal, this firm, I don't know about these individuals, but this firm does municipal audits across the nation. I mean, they're
Okay.
very, I think they're the largest firm for this in the nation, as far as I'm aware. So it's not like, and I guess, I think they're willing to do what is asked of them. They just need direction. They don't want to speculate and then us be frustrated when we don't get what we want. So I think they're just looking to us for guidance.
So are you saying, Rich, that what you read to your people that you trust, you read them what they have done for the city in the past?
No,
or what was
I read.
the proposal?
I read their appendix procedures to be performed.
Okay,
I read that whole list to them, and they said, that's not enough. That's just kind of sugarcoating the audit, that it needs to be, there needs to be more into it.
and did they tell you what more needs to be in?
Well, they did a few things. Part of it was they need to look at the credit card billing and payments more closely. They need to take a look at bank statements front and back of checks. Need to look into the cash receipts. Need to specify that they're gonna get down to looking at amounts around the $500 mark, not that $10,000 mark. They don't specify where they're going. Maybe do a W-2 audit along with it. Those were just the initial thoughts on their part. But they also said we need to look at not only cash receipts, but also receipts of any kind. Watch the money coming in, match it up to the deposits. So there needs to be more, in my opinion.
What more in your opinion? You wanna write a list down and we could go to them with what?
We could
you
do it,
think
we
needs
could
to
do
be
that.
done?
You know, and it also was brought to my attention that possibly maybe we should look at a different CPA firm so that they're not doing, you know, maybe these guys, they've done it for so long that maybe we should look at an outside source for a one-time audit.
Because then
You're
you're
getting,
asking them to check their own work.
yep,
Yeah.
so those are just a couple of things I had.
So get a different one to do a more in-depth
Well-
audit instead of these guys.
Or at least have them do a proposal, if nothing else. But I've also read about where, and that's one of the questions when I asked him how long the lead auditor's been on,
Mm-hmm.
because if he's also the one doing the in-depth audit, well, what's his incentive to really go find anything, because he's checking himself from previous years.
Mm-hmm.
So you would wanna rotate that lead auditor at least, and maybe then also the other, auditors that are under him. So it may be that the smart thing is to go out and find another source.
I can look into that if.
And we only have one proposal, so we have nothing to compare it to.
Well, and it's not really a proposal because we maybe asked for the price of apples, but what we need are oranges. I mean, it's not, it doesn't mean anything, I don't think.
So you want Jacob to look out for,
If, I guess I can look at some other options that reach out to nearby communities or see what, I don't know, how many firms use Clifton Larson Allen or,
Well,
but, see what other options there are. If there are firms that any of you are aware of and would like maybe a proposal from, I can look into that as well. I took notes the best I could on the
Yeah.
items you mentioned. If
Well, and if you want to, if you make contact, give me a call and we can talk.
okay,
I'll be glad, if they come in, I'll be glad to try to figure out a time to maybe even sit in with you when you talk to them or something. Or we can do
okay,
a conference call.
okay.
And again, I want the public to know, we're not looking specifically because there's red flags. We're not going after anything or anyone. It's just an in-depth audit for the city and no more.
What this firm has outlined in this proposal, or whatever term you would prefer to call it. It is more detailed than we've had in the past, correct?
I guess I don't know if I'd call it more detailed.
Well, didn't he talk about increasing the sample size?
That's something we had discussed. I don't. They feel that, from my discussion with both Craig and Adam, that it would be difficult and probably to the frustration of the council to just do a in-depth audit of everything for the 4 years, which I think is what we discussed. I think part of it's driven by cost, and part of it's, you know, how much time it would take them, and what they believe the city would get from it. Now, maybe you guys certainly don't have to agree with that perspective, but that's the understanding that I've gotten from them, and they are kind of urging the council to define specific things that they're concerned about, and then they can look at that more in depth rather than just let's just increase the sample sizes and look at everything, because that's a large task, I think. You know, if you're replicating 4 years worth or not, I mean, they come in and they spend a full week doing a single year audit, and that's not all of the work they do. That's collecting a lot of things. They go back to their office and do more work before they complete the audit. So if you're saying 4 years with larger sample sizes, I'm just trying to think about the time commitment that would take them to do that. Is that a month, 2 months? That's a lot of, and I think that's where they're trying to get. We need to know what we're looking for, not just look at everything.
True, but when they're in here, they're also going through the procedures and controls, where
Mhm.
when they're doing this audit, they're not needing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at the data.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a difference between the annual and this one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they are licensed and certified. One would like to believe they know what they're looking for. You know, look at the various trails or trends. And from what I know about auditing, even auditors, they submit reports and are audited themselves. So I wouldn't think that they would come in here and do an unsatisfactory audit.
Well, I'm not saying that they would, but I think it would be smart to at least get another aspect, view, so to speak, or maybe the next one will be too far out of line that these guys will end up with it, but I don't think it's gonna hurt us to look into it.
Who knows, maybe we'll be so satisfied they become our new audit company.
Cause in this, they say that their fees would range from 3,500 to 7,000.
Yes.
Well, I guess I would like to see what it's gonna cost to go deeper with a broader stroke. You have to justify expenditures. You know, and don't know, I can't. I'm gonna have to see the dollar and cent side before I would entertain someone being in here for 2 to 3 weeks, peeling all the layers back, to see if there's something there that, we don't really as a group feel that there's any, we haven't seen any red flags in the past.
Well, we haven't, but that's part of the system. You don't know it until it gets caught. So, I personally just believe that if we're going to do it, this is the time to do it.
Well,
And-
I won't discount that.
And I think it's just good practice with the turnover we've had to do it.
I'll plan to look at some
Okay.
other firms, see if they're interested in submitting some ideas or a proposal, and I guess bring it back to our next meeting. And I don't know that they would all agree, all the firms would agree with this, but I think both Craig and Adam's perspective on this was that since there was no present concern for any wrongdoing or whatever, that it wouldn't hurt our timeline for our fiscal year 19 audit. They could happen at the same time or whatever. I mean,
Is there a required completion date for that annual audit?
I'm not sure. I assume there's a date that it needs to be submitted to the state, but normally it's more of a concern for the auditing firm to complete that report.
Were you given names, Rich, of audit firms to look into?
No.
Recommendations?
No.
So we'll wait until you come back with
Do
more.
you think you can have that nailed down by the next meeting?
I don't know if I'll have proposals. That will kind of depend on them, but I'll hopefully at least have a list of firms, and hopefully they'll be working on proposals.
Okay.
We'll table this still.
Yeah.
Any public comments?
Question, Tom Durgan, property owner, downtown. I missed the last meeting, and I'm not sure if you guys covered any of this, but are you going with Rich's recommended of the 4 years back full audit then, or, I know, I think he just said $500, but, so like 500 up, is it gonna be a full audit? Except for that, and is it gonna be a full 4-year back?
It's undetermined yet.
Well, what they proposed was going to, I think if I remember right, July 1st of 2016, and coming forward from then. So you'd have 16, 17, 18.
Okay, so that's back in the, okay, all right. And Rod, I kinda have to respectfully disagree with you a little bit. I know that there might not be red flags, but I think a lot of this stuff is found accidentally, and I do think the city needs to do this. You might find money you don't have, you might find money that you didn't know you had, so, I think you need to do it, so, thank you.
Seven new business. 7.1, discussion possible action on the first reading of ordinance amending chapter 55 of the city code, animal protection and control, to discontinue dog licenses and permit microchip identification in lieu of calling vaccination tag.
Do you wanna kinda describe your thoughts on this? Sure.
Back in April, or roughly April, we started discussing the possibility of getting rid of the dog tag ordinance. This kind of came as a result of just a few meetings, community interactions and whatnot, as well as some talk throughout the police department. As far as what we wanted the dog tag ordinance to accomplish for the city, what it was accomplishing, and what it wasn't accomplishing that we had hoped that it might. Essentially what we found out was, and these figures are not massive by any means, but what we found out was that we're spending more money every year on the dog tags than what we're actually getting in return, so we're not breaking even. And in addition to that, we're not dealing with the animals who are responsible pet owners' animals. The animals that we're getting lost and found, dog bites, dogs running at large, things of that nature, they usually do not have dog tags, and they're not coming in and getting their licenses. So that was kind of what prompted the discussion or consideration to maybe look at something different. So what we wanted to go with was, there's a few different things. I guess first of all, a lot of the cities are getting away from the dog tags just because they're somewhat outdated, the associated costs, as well as the statistics that go along with it. One of the cities that we found was kind of a model city for us. Although it was out of the state, it was San Antonio, Texas. They require the dog to be microchipped, and they require the dog to have rabies vaccinations. And so from there, essentially what happens is your local government or your police department is completely out of the process. They have absolutely nothing to do with annual registration requirements or anything of the sort. It purely, much like vehicle insurance, it rests on the responsible pet owner to make sure that they're taking the steps to either get their animal microchipped and rabies vaccinations, or most cases, what I think we're finding out. I just got 2 dogs myself for my family. Pretty much any adoption agency is doing this automatically, and it's incorporated into the cost of the adoption. It's part of the adoption fees. So most animals, I think, are microchipped. If not, it's moving towards that rapidly. And essentially, we're going to buy a microchip reader. That microchip reader is roughly $30 to $60. There's different models and whatnot. We'll have immediate feedback if we find a dog running at large. We'll know who the pet owner is. We get the dog back to him. And I guess at the end of the day, it provides officers immediate feedback on who the animal belongs to. And it doesn't really hurt us in any way, because the dogs that we're dealing with now, in negative ways, they're not microchipped. They don't have dog tags. So that's kind of the gist of what started this and where we went through this. Then it was submitted to the city attorney to check out and look for revisions.
So if you get a dog that's running at large, and then we find out who the owners are, but the dog's not microchipped, at that time, are they having to then chip the dog? Like, how are we gonna do it?
Yeah, I guess that the basic answer to the question is yes. It would be no different though than if the dog was not tagged or registered now, and we found out who the owners were. The unfortunate reality though is that is exactly what we're finding. We're finding dogs that are not microchipped, they're not registered. The owners are not going to come forward and claim the dog for fear of getting a ticket for allowing their dog to run at large. We usually spend then a short amount of time, or potentially a longer amount of time, either putting the dog in our back seat or chaining it up to the front of the police department because we have no way to handle that animal. We call the animal welfare and friends, who then comes down here, and they're generally very good about it. They can get here in a fairly decent amount of time. Nobody claims the animal though. It then gets microchipped and adopted out to somebody else.
How
And
many
those-
occurrences would you have in a week, say?
Of running at large, or
Yeah.
um, weekly is probably not a good measurement of that because we don't have them weekly. They're somewhat infrequent, but of the ones that we've had that are running at large, I don't think there's been a single one that has had a registration or a dog tag on it.
But if they want their dog back, they have to have it microchipped to get it back. Yes or no?
Well,
Will that-
I think the
is
way the
that
ordinance
in
reads is it's
enforce?
really the owner's choice between they either have to have a tag showing rabies vaccination and owner information or be microchipped, and I guess
Yeah, the tag though, I guess we wouldn't furnish that.
no,
A tag.
that would be a
So,
tag provided
yes.
by themselves or the vet.
Yeah, so in that case, you know, if the animal, I guess, to go back a little, the problem that we're finding is there's no identification on the animal at all, typically in most cases. So we can't even go to the next step of identifying the owner or having them meet any requirements whatsoever.
And I'm not sure, we have a dog and she's microchipped. But in the event, say, we got a dog from somebody that was already microchipped, is the microchips have my address and my information on it? Or if I were to move and our dog goes with us, then now, am I making sense? Does that get changed or?
So
How would
a
you-
previous microchip, a
Yeah.
previous owner's microchip in your animal, and they sold or gave you the dog.
Yeah.
I believe it would still reflect their address. That would have to be something that's changed.
Sure, you just have to update the database.
Yeah. The reader, I guess I don't know what the technical term for it is. I believe they're just called microchip readers. The ones that we would have, we cannot put data into a microchip. There is the ability to do that, but we would not have that functionality. Those types of equipment are far more than what we would have.
And you believe that the reader, if we go this route, the reader that you would possess is compatible to dogs that would currently be microchipped?
Yes.
It's not like you would have to remove and replace by a more up-to-date, that you would be able to capture all the information you need going backwards.
Yeah, if I think I understand you correctly, the reader that we would get would be able to capture any microchips that are in animals currently, and I'm only presuming into the future, as technology advances, like any technology, I'm sure at some point in time there would be a date somewhere in the future where we would have to update technology potentially. It's hard to, I guess much like computer updates, I can't look at a date in the future and say technology will change to this degree and we have to change at that point. But as of right now, for the foreseeable future, yes.
But if it's only costing $30, if you got 2 years out of it, or even 3 years, it's per year, it's not that expensive, so,
Sure.
We spend more on dog tags.
yeah.
Yeah.
And from what I'm told from those in the, I guess, veterinary field and those dealing with animals, these universal readers, they're consistent across the board. So there's different models. Again, you can purchase anyone from $30 to $60, but they all read universally the same barcode, I guess, that's imprinted in those tags or those microchips.
So if we agree and this passes and we move forward, is it your plan to go out and visit with the vet and inform them that we have this ordinance now and that we're encouraging microchipping so that they at the vet clinic are informing everybody who has a pet that the city is
Yeah, I believe that there's been,
recommending this?
there's some communication that's already happened with the local vet. I don't know that, I mean, I would be more than happy to do that, and I can, send written communication as well to make sure that that happens. I think it's pretty standard now, though, that that is taking place, in most cases anyways. As I said, you know, the two animals that we just purchased, it was just part of the adoption fee, and in looking around a several county radius at different adoption agencies, that was all figured into all of their agencies. It was just something that, they automatically do, so.
I understand for the dogs that are currently being adopted or currently being purchased. But what about the people that have had dogs for years and have chosen not to have them microchipped for whatever reason?
Sure.
Do you have any plan to ensure that they have rabies vaccination?
Essentially, no, we don't. Again, we're completely removing ourselves from that oversight process. It would be reactive in if your dog bit somebody, if your dog's running at large and we catch it, we go to ask those questions and find out that is not the case, then yes, there would be penalties for not having it vaccinated. The only thing I can say to that effect, though, is we're not doing that now. So we're not going out and checking to make sure that your dog is vaccinated properly. When you come in for your annual registration, it's not a large amount of animals, so I don't want to paint a wrong picture, but there are a lot of them that we have had where the vaccination does not expire for another 3 or 4 months, but they'll come in and get their year's registration, then they'll allow their vaccination to expire. So for 8 to 10 months out of the year, it is not covered, it does not have vaccinations, but it still has a valid registration.
Hadn't thought of that.
I'll make the motion to discontinue dog license and permit microchipping identification.
Second.
First by Cody, second by Betty.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Can I ask a question? What, down, it says 55.18, are we doing away with that, or we're talking about the infraction subject to civil penalty for not having the rabies vaccination? Is that being stricken then, or
The
are we?
5518 is what, it's the new language, and so if you're talking about that, I mean,
What the
the
civil-
motion should include a dollar amount for that
Yes,
section.
that's my question, is what is that dollar amount? Have you guys discussed what you think it should be?
I haven't had any discussions on that. Have you had thoughts? No.
I like them to be hefty.
Do we have anything right now for any penalties for not being licensed or anything of that nature?
We had that sliding scale, didn't we?
Yeah.
I
If
think-
it, like, the
We
first
did.
offense so much, second,
Yeah,
third.
I think so. I don't remember the exact amounts. I can probably find them.
Can we use that same scale on this?
Keep it the same
Just-
price and same scale.
I would think so.
Okay.
I think it was like
That
first
was-
through 4 offenses, maybe.
And that was fairly new, like just a couple of months ago, wasn't it?
Right,
We
well,
just- not
year
too
year
long,
ago.
A year
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
Time flies. when
Can
you're
you add
having
that for the
fun.
next meeting, for our next reading?
So I would just indicate that you want that same scale, and
Please
then
add
we'll
that.
actually have the language included for the next reading, yes.
Perfect.
Any further discussion? And it's a roll vote.
Any public comment?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Nancy Schaefer, 803 North Division Court. I like the idea of not a second tag and listening to that jingle. So I do like that. But I do have a comment, because I think the motion was for the microchipping, but I think what you proposed in your thing was rabies or microchip. You aren't saying both, you're saying,
The ordinance gives the owner the option to either have a tag that has, and I'll just read it verbatim, the owner's name, address, telephone number, and proof of vaccination, anytime that it's off the owner's property.
right, but.
Or a microchip.
Or,
Or, it is a
Okay.
choice.
I wasn't quite understanding his motion, so.
That's the way the ordinance reads. Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be just fine.
Yes.
And we'll go to roll vote.
We start this vote with Rod Smith,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Weimer,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
K. Smith,
Yes.
Possible waiver of second and third reading. 7.2, discussion and possible action on the first reading of ordinance amending chapter 55 of the city code, animal protection and control, to restrict the tethering of dogs.
There's no specific incident or that I guess preempted this for discussion, but it just I guess came up as a option to maybe help with some of the different vicious dog concerns we've had. I guess I'm just putting it out there for your consideration and.
Does this seem to be a problem?
All I can speak is from personal experience. I mean, I think I've seen dogs out on tethers. I don't know that if they're out there in ways that would be in violation of this ordinance, but I think it generally supports, I think, good dog ownership, as generally understood by, you know, I guess I would say the veterinarian world.
Well, I'm not a dog owner, but is a 30-minute limit, is that a reasonable time, or is that too short? I know in hot weather and cold weather, it might be about right, but spring and fall, I'm just asking.
We don't have a fenced-in yard. And so the times that we've tethered our dog is when I've gotta go to work and I'm standing outside, I'm like, let's go do your business, I gotta get ready or I'm gonna be late for work. Well, we'll tether her while I run in and finish getting ready and let her back in. And she does better when I'm not with her because she thinks I'm gonna play if I'm with her. So I think 30 minutes is ample amount of time. Usually our dog's only out there for maybe 10 minutes at a time, 15, unless we're out there with her. Todd has tethered her while he's been doing yard work and doesn't want her to run off because we don't have a fenced-in yard. Like if he's mowing, and then he'll move the stake to mow where she's at, and then she goes in with him when he goes in. At that point, she's probably out there more than 30 minutes, but he's right there with her, if that makes sense. So I think 30 minutes is plenty of time if that's the purpose you're using while you're tethering the dog. if it's just so she doesn't run off and you don't have a fenced in area for her, or him, whatever you have for a dog.
If this hasn't been an issue in the past,
Hmm.
I'm not sure why we're spending much time on it.
Well, I would say, lots of times I can stake the boys out in the yard while I work in the garden.
Yeah,
So I'm out there more than 30 minutes.
but you're right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does say unattended.
Well,
And I do
But-
think that people have complained, cause I've heard it, where dogs are tethered outside for long extended periods of time and then they start barking excessively.
Does the city need to make an ordinance for every terrible pet owner?
no.
Let's move on.
So we'll let that one die.
I guess if that's a motion to table it, I don't, or
second.
just to take no action. I don't know.
I'm not interested in taking the action.
Alright,
I have a, go ahead, I have a
Go ahead.
request though. Can we put 7.3 do 7.4 first, because Derek has requested to be here and he's on his way now.
so go with 7.4.
Is that okay? Can we do that?
And we'll see what that is.
I don't have a problem with it.
Alright, so we'll do nothing with 7.2, we'll go to 7.4. Did anybody want to comment on 7.2? No. 7.4, discussion and possible action on resolution setting public hearing on proposal to vacate and convey the north 100 feet of the alley in block 2 of Scott and Skinner addition to Strawberry Hill.
And there's been no comment from neighbors or anything else?
Well,
We'll have to
I haven't
set a
really
hearing.
contacted them. I mean, this is just to set the public hearing. I mean, I know when they were present a couple meetings ago to request that this be considered, and I think at that time they had contacted at least one of their neighbors. So I think they're, you know,
Make the motion to
Open
set
on
the
it.
public hearing for August 12th,
Second.
6 p.m. City Council chambers.
First by Cody, second by Betty. To set it. First meeting in August. Any discussion? And it's a roll vote.
We'll start with Schaefer,
Yes.
Weimer,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Kate Smith,
Yes.
and Rod Smith.
Yes.
How soon was it gonna be before you got here?
In a minute.
Okay, we'll go back to 7.3, discussion and possible action on Martin Gardner Architecture pre-application phase B proposal for downtown revitalization grant project.
yeah.
Is there a HDMI close by?
It should be the cable coming from the ceiling.
Right here.
Do we have the remote? Oh, it's up there. There's a remote by the microphone. You'll have to turn the TV on.
I don't know if there's any introduction to be had other than what I'm going to show you a little bit about.
My name's Kyle Martin. I'm with Martin Gardner Architecture, and Bethany, who would be the project manager, couldn't be here tonight, so I'm here in her stead. And we're located out of Marion, is kind of the home office, and we have another office outside of Strawberry Point. And we do work in all different sizes of communities throughout eastern Iowa, and a little bit into Minnesota and a little bit into Illinois. So, to start with, and I believe there's been some previous discussion on the program itself and whether or not to do it. So I'm just going to go over some of the experiences that I've had with this program through the years and our firm has had. And the basic idea is that this grant serves as a catalyst, as a place to jump off from, or a place to transition through into the future of your main street, of your downtown. It helps conserve the resources that have already been invested in the buildings and the streets and the infrastructure, reusing things that still have good life to them. It keeps properties on the tax rolls. It also promotes or increases and stabilizes those taxable values over time. Above all, it really reduces jeopardizing neighboring investments. Talk louder. Okay, sure. So to start with, I'm just going to show a few examples of buildings that we've worked with. And the first thing that this project does is it enhances kind of the spirit of the block. You can tell that there's a major difference between those two slides of what can happen with the money through this grant. It enhances all the storefronts to be able to do business just better because you can see into the space, you can see the merchandise easier. Previous to the renovation on the right, you couldn't see hardly any merchandise, let alone the interior space back to the rear of the store. This is another striking difference in what this grant can do. It contributes to the overall character of a place. We have a lot of those buildings that were infilled over time. A building was lost, and something much less expensive or ornate was put there in place, and it doesn't really contribute to what the neighboring buildings have to offer in terms of ornament or of character. So this grant can actually go through and kind of help spruce up and enhance some of those existing properties. The next piece is really the interesting part of the ability for this grant. So this is the Masonic Temple in Marion, and they participated in the downtown revitalization grant. And for the most part, their participation was routine maintenance and a couple of items that had kind of got messed up back when they renovated in the 50s. So it was really just tuck pointing the front facade of the building and replacing some inappropriate windows that were put in the 80s and replacing the front door and restoring the mosaic tile work at the front entry and soldering some tin ornament on the front. But what led to it after that was the Masonic Temple and the lodge members suddenly got comfortable with renovating their building. They got comfortable with spending a little bit of money, and they got suddenly wanted to be proud of their space. So they actually just completed a $70,000 interior renovation to bring back the original tin ceilings, put down new carpet, build a fireplace to enhance their interior space, and they're also looking at about $150,000 worth of an elevator addition. So suddenly they're making their space handicap accessible, all from a $25,000 initial dollar investment from the lodge on the facade of general maintenance items. This is another interesting project. So this was a building that originally participated in the grant, but they didn't actually go through with construction. And it currently actually still looks like it does on the left picture today. But the plans for that property owner are to actually infill around it, basically tripling or quadrupling the rentable tenant space available on his property. And he actually bought the building specifically to get into the grant from the previous owner that hadn't touched the building in literally 25 years. And so this particular property was holding down rents, holding down property values around it, and suddenly the promise of this investment is there where it wasn't before. This is actually not a downtown revitalization grant project, but because other properties were getting bought and sold around it, this came up for sale. And one contractor bought it, gutted out all the 1950s renovations, exposed the 1800s tin ceilings, then sold the building again to the dentist that recently put in $1.5 million worth of investment into this building, including an elevator and including revitalized tenant spaces upstairs. Here's another project where it wasn't the grant didn't do the initial great things for this property. The grant did some routine tuck pointing. It did a replacement of one storefront, and then the building got sold, and somebody came in and put in about $1 million worth of investment to get apartments upstairs where there weren't before, and the realtor took over the ground floor, and there's really actually a very neat little boutique shop in the back. So one important aspect of the grant is that it does a lot of buildings at the same time. They don't necessarily have to be continuous, but what doing them at the same time does is it brings all those properties up together at the same time, because it creates a hardship for other properties that are trying to do good on their own. It creates a struggle. My parents actually own the building up there where our office is, and they bought it in 1992, and there were pigeons flying around in the upstairs, and over the course of 27 years worth of incremental improvements here and there, and as they could afford it, they finally turned a profit on their rent last year after 27 years. So when you can do multiple buildings at the same time, you can bring that potential up much faster in a much more significant way, and there's a lot more energy from the whole neighborhood and not just a single property owner. So going into the process a little bit, there's many steps, but the first step that we are looking at doing under this proposal is really getting any property owners that are interested to look at the project, find out a little bit more about it, and then go through the process of developing what we have, or basically conceptual drawings, this is an example up here. So we're kind of figuring out what the scope is. Do you need window replacements? Do you need awnings? Do you need tuck pointing? Things of that nature, and developing some preliminary costs so that we can pool all those folks together, all those properties together, and go for that grant. The construction documents, this is kind of an indication of, that comes later after the grant is won. So the investment in going after the grant up front is relatively small to the back end after the grant is received. And of course we help through construction, so here we actually pointed out to a property owner after they had finished tuck pointing, because it looked so good and so even, because we followed all the Secretary of the Interior standards. They couldn't tell where it was tuck pointed, so I actually diagrammed out where it was. So from there, I'll answer any questions about the grant or about the process, or if there's any questions about any of the properties I talked about there.
I guess at what point in time through this will there be an identification of
The properties
of the structural integrity of the building?
Sure. So that's part of our analysis during this phase. So through everything, whichever properties want to or think they want to participate, there's a relatively small agreement between the city and the individual property owners, and then we go and actually we'll look at the building from every angle that we can see. And where we see mortar falling out, where we see columns leaning, where we see doors sticking, things like that, we'll document all that, and then we'll assemble kind of a menu of costs for that, because obviously maintenance is, well, let's not tuck point this year, let's do this next year. But we create a menu of that, and then we also meet with the owners directly to see what they would like to see done with the building. So if we have a property where like this is the case, they can elect to rebuild that storefront so it looks appropriate, or they can bypass that and pay for tuck pointing if that's all they want to pay for. And so in that regard, we develop a menu, and then we work with the owners and their budget to figure out what should be in the grant that they want to tackle through the grant.
So you're basically only doing that portion of the building. You're not looking at the inside to make sure the inside of the building is sound?
So we do look at the inside of the building. Technically, the grant only covers the front foot of the property, but if we see something that's going to be detrimental to this project from the inside, whether it's structural problems with the floor above, we will flag those and identify costs for those as well. They just may not be covered directly by the grant, but they can still be done as work under this project. So we can correct some issues while we're taking care of the front, or if it's a minor issue, that we can just flag to the owner so that they can take care of under their own time and forces. That's a possibility as well. There are some things, if the back of the building is known to be bad, we'll look at that and we'll at least identify some things on the surface that we know need to happen before we can proceed with anything else on the building as a precaution. We always find things that during construction that you can't see from the surface as well. So, but we identify everything that we can.
So if you find that a building is structurally not sound,
Mm-hmm.
do you not recommend them for the facade program? There seems to be, like, a concern of the public is that we would be spending city money to put lipstick on a pig.
We always have those concerns as well.
Sure.
There's some fine judgment calls from time to time, but generally speaking, if a building is truly unsound, like it's structurally deficient and in danger of hurting people, then obviously we need to voice that loud and clear, and that's when more heads come together of, okay, does this need to be condemned? Does it need to be torn down? Does it need to be partially torn down and then kind of patched back whatever is left? And so it's a case by case when it gets that bad, but we do make recommendations when we see those. So.
And I suppose because of the cost in that to the owner, sometimes they on their own then will back out of being part of the grant.
Yeah, so this comes back to the process a little bit. So the first part is really gathering interest, because obviously we want who needs to be in the project, we want them to look seriously at it. And at each phase, so once we complete this conceptual part where we create the pretty picture and the initial costs, to move on to the next phase, a lot of times we've had success where the city has asked for some additional commitment from them, so even if they write a nominal check of a couple $100, because they're going to be expending our services moving forward. So if they're not willing to commit, or if we discover in that first phase some things that they're not able to handle or tolerate, then they can pull out of the project. So, and you can see these, it's kind of hard to see, but so each one of these gray blocks kind of represents a property, so to speak. And you can see, so after the first phase, I kind of had an example that 14 and 15 backed out of the project. As we move through the phases, the sizes of those blocks kind of change from column to column. So that represents that sometimes the scope changes. Sometimes we find out that you're going to need a bigger share of the overall pie to get your work done, or the property owner says, I'm not willing to spend that much, let's pare the scope back so their portion shrinks a little bit. And so phase by phase, we go through what's called design development, where we take the concept and we start to add proof, a little more proof and a little more investigation to it. That's where some folks drop off, because then we really have a pretty good idea that the costs are going to be at a certain place. And then when we go out to bid, then all the buildings that are committed to be in are bid as one big package. But then after the bid is awarded, the contractor has to split all those buildings back out so that they can be billed to the owners and to the city proportionately. And on the Marion project, we had 3 properties back out after bidding. So that was unfortunate, But because we'd gone through that process of eliminating all the others that weren't going to move ahead early, we still had a good amount for the remaining 7 buildings. So I think we learned on West Union that we learned that lesson, because basically I think we had 17 buildings go through and only 11 continued. So we developed kind of a weeding out process as we went.
In Marion, how many did you start with?
And Marion was weird. So we started out with, I think, 15 buildings at one, and then like 4 dropped out, and then 3 joined, and then and the problem was that the properties were buying and selling so quickly. One building actually sold twice during the period of our project. It was in and out depending on which owner had it at the time, and then we ended up only building 7 of the projects. Out of the 10 that went out to final bid. So, but Elkader, we had a good participation, and with like I think 14, and Port City was very good participation. I think 16 or 17 maybe. Forget the numbers off the top of my head. But any other questions?
Yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts may be on this, but you and 2 others were the only ones who submitted proposals out of 15.
Sure.
So 20% returned information. Why do you think the other 80% did not?
Everybody has their own reasons. Depending on who you asked, this particular type of project is a little bit of a specialty, just because of the complexity and the number of property owners that you're dealing with at once. So having, and I'll be honest, we did not make a good living off of the first 2 projects like this that we did. Some firms have backed away depending on how their schedules work. Do they have historic preservation as part of their background? We have Bethany she worked at the state historic preservation office for a while, so she's got a good understanding, and we feel comfortable about this type of project where a lot of other firms don't. I do know that a lot of other firms, or a lot of firms in general, are very busy right now, so that could influence what types of projects they go for. Distance is always an issue as well. We're glad we're only 20 minutes away.
So you said your first couple projects
They were
really
tough
did.
going, yeah.
So is it a difficult project? Is it hard to?
The biggest thing is just keeping the rules in check, because being a CDBG federal grant, there are a lot of rules, and sometimes it comes down to the grant administrator. If they have a good handle on the rules themselves, not all of them don't, that we do things in the right order, we have the right protections for the owner, right protections for the city, and the federal government is satisfied that they're protected as well. As long as all these things kind of stay in check, it can be relatively smooth. It just has to be methodical is all.
So who would the administrator be?
ECOG is the grant administrator. They're actually going to help us write the grant, and administrator if we are awarded. But
And have you worked with them?
Yes, yeah.
And how are they as administrator then?
The one that I work with personally, he just retired, Gary Hughes. He specializes in housing. So in that regard, I don't know who we'll have, but we work with ECOG fairly regularly. I actually sat on one of their boards for 6 years there for a while, so we have good relationship with them this week.
So your fees are not covered by the grant, is that correct?
Correct, yeah. I believe, depending on the number of projects that actually move forward with the grant and what kind of budget is being used, I probably shouldn't go any further because I don't. That's one of the rules that we'd kind of have to look at as far as could the city be reimbursed for this front portion at all?
Do the property owners absorb any of those fees of yours?
That's kind of up to the city. So in Marion, in order to participate in the project, the property owner they have to sign an easement agreement, and which is universal for any community in the project or in the program. And then the city of Marion actually requested that they write a check for $150 or $250 to advance to each phase. It wasn't going to cover all of our fees, but it was going to give the property owner a little skin in the game. And that amount can escalate as the design costs go up later in later phases as well.
You spoke of the various requirements to the program. Who will monitor those, that they're being met, and then who applies the muscle?
The grant administrator is really where the muscle comes from, because they really are, they're kind of the agent that really makes sure the money gets spent how it's supposed to be. And we're familiar enough with the rules that we can kind of help watch out if we bump up against the rules, or if there's something that seems a gray area, we go right and get an interpretation as quickly as we can. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How many buildings do we have interested?
I think at this time we had, 21 total buildings. I mean, more if you count by address, which I think the grant does. But I guess my recommendation, I guess it'd be nice to see them all, but
Okay.
I think as Kyle alluded to, sometimes people drop out. I think it's better to do more now and have the preliminary work done, so that if some drop out, we still maintain above 10, or at least 10 buildings, so we can get the full amount of the grant.
Well, and I would think realistically, I mean, to lose half is quite a bit, so realistically, that would be a high number.
To lose half, yeah, it's not devastating though by any means.
Right.
And I think they've actually reduced the minimum number of properties to move forward, so that's helpful. How many did you say were interested?
I think we have 21.
21.
Again, that's counting actual structures, not addresses.
Okay.
But
Yeah, and I'd say that's a good number to start with. And if we end up at 12, 14, 18, I think those are pretty solid.
Well, and for a size of this town, that
Mhm.
speaks that I think it's
Yeah.
the people, yeah.
What was the average cost spent per building?
Ooh, it varied by project. As little as, so for Marion, there was as little as $11,000. They basically just had, it was an old shop building, so they basically replaced the garage doors with something that worked better, and as much as $200,000 for one single property. It was a very large building, of course. But, yeah. And in Marion, we did have one building that was going to be such a lion's share of it and they were going for other tax credits and things like that complicated their lives enough, so they actually backed out because it was not really going to be fair to the other property owners.
Has any community ever used this in conjunction with other grants and things?
Absolutely, yeah. Pretty much anything through the IEDA with challenge grants and catalyst grants, those all marry up real well. Whether you can duplicate those funds on the same project is difficult to say, but if you end up with a special case for a project, maybe you pull that out and send them after a different grant, and that they don't fit into this very well. Historic tax credits are difficult to marry with this grant because, again, it's federal dollars and they don't want to pay for things twice. The documentation for historic tax credits is really challenging. There's an upper story revitalization grant that I think focuses on housing that we had it on the same building as a downtown grant in West Union, I think, and that did not marry up very well. But that doesn't say, like, again, that, boy, this would be a great candidate for some other type of grant that we identify going through this process.
Sure.
Open for,
So I do have a question for you, Jacob. We talked about whether or not these fees would be able to be used as part of our portion of the
Mhm.
250.
Mhm.
Did you look into that yet, or?
I don't have a I don't think they can, again, be reimbursed since they were prior to the award, but
Well, not necessarily reimbursed, but if we're supposed to put 250,000 into it, can these fees be a portion of our 250,000?
Derek, are you aware?
Last I knew, no, because anything expended, just like any grant, pre-getting the grant award doesn't qualify.
So instead of having 250, we're actually gonna be looking at 270 plus, more than likely.
But like Kyle, is Kyle, is that your name? Yep. Like Kyle mentioned, there is, depending on.
Can you?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, but depending on, like Kyle mentioned, sometimes if you end up coming in under that 10 threshold, there are some times that the state will work with you on recouping some of those earlier costs, but that's kind of fund dependent. So the easiest answer is no, that these are upfront costs that you incur to get the grant.
Okay.
But also, Kyle, did you say we could have people to have skin in the game that they could pay some of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be set basically with whatever you want to do. Like I said, Marion, they just had a flat low fee, but if you wanted to graduate it based on property value or something like that, you certainly could.
Thank you.
And then one more question, I'm gonna steal this from Rod. Where's the money coming from to do this?
I think we would look at doing tax increment financing to help reimburse some of this cost. I can't say for sure that would cover all of the expense. I think otherwise it's just gonna have to be tax funded. I think the report that I shared in my memo to you supported the fact that this really does impact property values, and that would therefore support the case for using TIF. I put the study that IEDA did on this program, properties that, or when they studied the cities that participated, all commercial properties as a whole had a negative trend in property value, 0.17%. I mean, small but still negative. Whereas the properties that participated and had the facades rehabilitated had a 43% increase in property value. So I guess I think that's the takeaway for me, that it supports itself. You're going to get out what you put in.
Any further questions?
I'll make a motion that we move forward with Martin Gardner Architecture.
Could you specify either a number of buildings that you're willing to approve funding for, or a dollar amount that you're willing to approve funding for in your motion?
Will that change though?
I mean, it might drop, but I guess I'm saying a maximum.
Oh,
Like, like, so that we,
Oh,
if
so
we have
for
to,
his evaluation will be on a maximum of
you
20
know,
buildings.
just so that we know how much
I get
we're
that.
allowed to do.
Alright.
I mean, I'd like to do more, but, you know, if getting this moving forward is contingent on having less evaluated up front, I guess that's acceptable.
So if we weren't gonna accept all 20, how do we determine,
We would just have to, I think, determine what,
and who's
what are the
gonna
best,
determine that?
best, it would really come down to, myself and Derek in determining what are the best, candidates for the grant. What's gonna help us get awarded.
I'm gonna
And-
rescind my motion for a minute.
And I guess the other thing is if you want, any skin in the game from them,
Then we
that
need
would-
a amount on that too. I don't see any problem with each of the buildings who want to participate have a, say, a couple $100 application fee, sort of a thing. I mean, Doug, can I ask you, cause you've done grants and stuff on this, what's the standard application fee? You wanna get up and you also work with ECOG, so you know kind of. Because I think what we could come up with is what the standard of its,
Doug Workman, I live right outside of town, but we've got some property. What we went through with the Catalyst grant was a little bit different than this particular application because it didn't involve an architectural firm. There's Kyle. It didn't involve an architectural firm. So there wasn't that upfront cost associated with it. It was simply working with the IEDA and having them come and evaluate it and see if they thought it was a project worth doing. And they actually came to us, so it was kind of easy. I wish I had more information for you, but sorry, I don't. I will say this though real quick, and I know there's probably other discussion talk around this, that just kind of listening to it and listening to your pitch, and Derek's talked about this, and I don't have any good data around any of this, and I'm learning just like everybody else is here too. And whether it's the right thing to do or wrong thing to do, you know, there are pros and cons to everything, but I left here in 1980 and then moved back 26 years later and was kind of got to watch some of the change that happened in downtown Anamosa, and it's all been good change. I've seen some good things happen here. And you watched Manchester and you watched Independence when the bypass went through Highway 20 and the Walmarts came in, kind of like here, and they all had some tough downtowns. I mean, they got tough, but they evolved. Programs like this came about. The state put the programs, the Catalyst programs, revitalization programs, the federal government got involved because they saw the need for it. So I guess in my mind, you know, when you're thinking about this kind of thing, you think about those towns, just like times in the past with Anamosa and the Main Street project here, or the streetscapes, I guess it was called. The things like Monticello's doing right now with, where are they at on that Main Street deal?
They go to present next week.
They'll present next week. They're one of 3 that might get this, and that'll be really good for that town.
and they're excited.
They ought to be.
They're, like, the whole town is excited.
Yeah, they ought to be. That's a good program. And Anamosa can do the same thing. So you guys got good leadership here. You got a good vision. You got to have a strategy to support it. You got to have then action plans to get there to support that strategy. And this might be one of them. So I hope when you're thinking about this, you're thinking about what's the right vision, what's the right strategy, and then how do we support it. My comments.
Thanks, Doug.
Unless there's objection from the council, and keep me in line in all the legality, Jacob, before we move forward with a motion, I would entertain public discussion before the motion. There's quite a few people in attendance, and there's not very many items left, so I'm gonna play poker here and think that a lot of the people in attendance possibly have an opinion on this agenda item. So if the if that's not
That's fine with me.
unlawful and the 5 council members would support that, I would like to hear the public's opinion.
I'm good with that.
I did have one clarification. I'm not sure. In our proposal, we broke out for 15, 20, and 25 buildings. So I don't know if that makes it any easier giving the motion, but that's how we had broken down our proposal. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.
With that, Mayor, though, I would also like the public to direct the inquiries to the council,
Not to each other.
and not to, and ask for some civility throughout this.
All right, so we'll open it up to public comment.
Tom Durgan, property owner downtown. I've asked the question a few times, and I think maybe he answered it. If I think the first picture. So I've asked what area this is gonna be. So I'm assuming, looking at the picture that he had, it's roughly looked like Huber Street to around Merritt's on Main Street, and maybe down North Fort. It's kind of hard to tell by the picture. Is that correct? On what area this is covering, or do we still not know?
No, we've kind of identified the target area. It's basically Huber down to, the Merritt property on that side of the street, and
Down North Fort.
it would
like the
be
bowling alley looked
existing.
like.
Yeah, and then it does cover a little bit of the side streets, but not very far. It's
And-
pretty. I think it was correctly reflected in his picture.
In his, and let me make this very clear, because anybody that knows me knows I am absolutely all about saving the old buildings. So let's get that straight right off the bat, because I've had some people say I'm not, and that's just a bold lie. In his proposals, I'm sitting there looking now, my understanding is this is for a full front of the building. In some of the pictures I've seen, I believe it was Kyle's, his name, it showed half buildings. So what is it? Are we doing a full building, or are we doing a half a building in the front if the owner decides to do whatever they want to do with this building?
Well, I think it was Kyle, it was half, it's whatever the money that the owners want to spend, correct?
Right, and it's also based on need of the building itself. So if the building doesn't need new windows, we don't have to obviously replace or refurbish those. So in a lot of cases, the storefront was the key piece, and that's what we like showing because it shows really well. The storefront was the area of focus, and so that's where you see the biggest change. There might have also been tuck pointing going on. Might have been some repair work on the backside of the parapet where the roof connects in a lot of those cases. So it really depends from building to building. Some wanted awnings, some didn't want awnings.
Like in one of the pictures it showed where they did the windows and the tuck pointing, and then they left the ugly bottom siding and stuff.
Right.
So I guess my question is why do any of it? You know, I'm sorry, but why do any of it if you're just gonna do a half a building, when it's my understanding that we were always gonna go, and I don't know what period, but it's my understanding that we're gonna go period correct on the front of these buildings. So, you know, and like the picture that he had, vinyl siding is not period correct at all, and there's a whole lot of this that isn't period correct, but I just like trying to clarify these and get them in my head.
I would say anything that is done is period correct, but if they choose not to do it, that's their choice, and so if it's existing, we can't really force them to do everything.
Wow, okay. And I've asked this before, does the facade program go to the sidewalk or to the basement floor?
It would go to the sidewalk. Now, if there's some issues underlying that support that facade, then we can address some of those, depending on what it is.
The money part of it, this is obviously really irritates me, is sticking money in someone's building that I think the property owners are absolutely responsible for. So, and if I understand, and here again, if I understand correctly, they'll take a look at the building in general. So, if this happens, I think the owners, and I've asked this many times, at the building owner's expense, at a minimum, from that facade back is 100% the building owner's expense. The city shouldn't pay a dime to have the rest of their building looked at. It's ridiculous, and I think that, and I know a lot of the buildings that Kyle's talking about, because I look at these buildings, and there's some beautiful buildings, but, you know, the one, I think it's the restoration dentist office in Marion, you know, I believe he said he stuck $1 million in that. We could have a pretty front, but I don't think there's many people in town here that are gonna stick $1 million in their building. I don't think there's a lot of people that are gonna stick a whole lot from the facade back in their building unless it's drywall and probably cover everything up. I don't think there's a lot of people that are gonna do it right. So if the city is gonna spend the money, there should be some ground rules or something to make sure that the rest of that building is taken care of before they stick the tax dollars in it. You know, here again, I'm just trying to understand this, because I like old buildings. But obviously, we've had this discussion where I voiced my opinion on the money part of this, and I just think the city needs to put a lot of this financial responsibility on the building owners. I don't think we need to stick any money in someone's building if the rest, and if you go through all this, and it's like, okay, Joe, don't wanna do it. Now the city, and I don't know what it's gonna cost these guys to do each, and I don't know if that's what Cody was asking when he asked about the money, what, you know, I don't know if there's a price that you guys have that average on each building that it's gonna cost for your services to look at this. But if Joe says, well, I'm not gonna do it now, and you're stuck in, say you guys have 5,000 in this building, then what? City's out $5,000, right? So I hope, and I talked to Rod, and I said, you know, I might be more accepting of this. I think this is my exact words to you when we talked. Because, okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a question. Listening to Tom did make me think of this. We've got several buildings where the main floor is owned by one person, second floor is owned by somebody else. How does that work?
I don't think that would work. That was the preliminary discussion I had. I know one of those properties, we had just one of the two owners interested, so I mean, I'll check into that further, but I don't think that would work. Fortunately, the other building that I'm aware of that's in that situation has both property owners on board, so I think that would be fine. They just, it might get a little bit more difficult to delineate where those costs are between those two property owners, but I think it can be done.
But if one wants to participate, one doesn't, does that negate the other person then?
I at this time, I think so.
Okay.
I could be wrong. It might depend on. Yeah, I would just have to check for sure. I guess I could see where, you know, I guess you could do second story windows and it's pretty delineated. That's just the second story and doesn't affect the bottom. But if you're, you know, doing something more involved, it becomes, well, how does that affect both stories?
How many, do you know how many of them buildings are that way? I mean, is there quite a few, or
I'm only aware of two, but I could be.
I was thinking that, like, in the last 15 years, that's become less and less, but I don't know exactly how many there are, but I thought there was like 2 or 3.
I'm aware of two at this point, but there may be more.
But out of those two, are any of them your 21?
Yes. And again, one of them, both property owners are interested.
One of them.
Both.
Both of them? Okay.
One of the two properties, both property owners
Okay.
are interested. The other property that I'm aware of, only one of the property owners is
But
interested.
that's of your 21, correct?
I think,
Is that how we got 21 addresses? There's 20 buildings, but 21 addresses. Because one building has 2 owners.
there's 21 buildings.
Okay.
I'm not counting addresses in that number. I'm not sure if I included the one that's just the single owner, so it's either 21 or 22.
Okay.
I have to double check that.
Yes, young lady.
I'm Nareet Finn. I'm a property owner. I don't think I'm on your list of 21. And I'm not sure if I really knew exactly how I was supposed to express interest, but I am interested. So I just wanted to say that maybe I'm not the only one that would be interested, but isn't necessarily officially on the list. So if you're going to cut it off at 21, I mean, maybe it would be fair to have a deadline or something to express interest, or, you know, give people an opportunity in case they miss the opportunity originally. So, thank you.
Thanks, Marie.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And we could even go to, just because we go up to 25, say, doesn't mean.
I mean, and we could do more, and we're still accepting interest, but it's really just what your guys' appetite is. There have been communities that do multiple years, so that's my thinking, is if we do this program is successful, we can apply in future years, and if we have some of this work done, there may need to be some updating, some rechecking things, but I think a lot of this work can be used for a second cycle if, you know, if we really come out of this with 24 buildings, it may or may not be, you know, where we cut it in half and do one cycle, half of them one cycle and half another. That is the strategy, I think, being used in Macokota. They're doing this in multiple cycles, because, you know, between the grant and the matching funds, you've got $1 million, and that only goes so far. So to invest the most in those buildings.
Do you know how they did that? Did they pick, like, how did you know how they determined which?
I think they ended up splitting either like east-west, north-south, or something to that nature, but there might be some exceptions to that. I think you want to try, for your grant, to try to get as much of a compact impact as possible. So, I mean, you want to try to cluster them if you can.
Any more public comment?
Bryce Rickbuff, just property owner. I don't know that I have a lot to say with the grant itself, except for the downtown in the rural America downtown. The reason these grants are put into place is to fix up these buildings that take a lot of expense to fix up. I think any grant that's out there that's worth looking at to help building owners fix things up properly is worth looking at. The one thing, my concern with any grant is that you need to be successful when you do it, and that there's a follow through with the plan, and you can't let any of these grants that you're looking at become stale or idle you need to use it to springboard to the next grant. So while it is a cost and it is an expense, as long as we have a plan going forward to make it work and be successful, there's more grants down the road that can be brought into the downtown in these buildings. From what I've seen in different towns, whether it's working or traveling, your downtown businesses in a downtown community are not capital generating businesses that can come up with $250,000 to rehab their building. You know, we're not gonna land a dentist and 15 banks to take in the downtown business fronts that have that funding to do their own buildings. So I think these are great opportunities, but the thing we need to do, or I push for, is just we need to be strategic in utilizing the grant and springing to the next grant to revitalize the downtown. The biggest thing I see with the downtown and the capital investment the city would be looking at and the return is from the home building side. When we see people come to town looking to move to town, buying a new house, you know, we got a lot of new growth going on out there. We got the Walmart. You come into town, you come past you get the Mexican restaurant, you got the 4-lane, the on-ramp, you come around the curve, things are kept pretty nice, fire station's in pretty good shape. Hit the curb, you got a nice library, you come up to the 4-way stop, you got Wayne Halls. You turn on Main Street, and you got everything's pretty good up to Fairway, Citizens, and then, you know, then we start getting a lot of empty storefronts. And in the buildings, I've bought a few buildings, so I'm kind of new to it. Tom's been doing work a lot longer down there, so he has a lot more street credit than I do with it. But there's a lot of people that want to be in the community downtown, but the amount of money it takes to get into those buildings and fix them up is a deterrent. So I guess in a nutshell, you know, I am supportive of the grant moving forward because I think of what it can do for the town over the next 5 years. The one caution I do put out there is we need to make sure that there's a plan, that we have an overall plan of executing this grant and springboarding into the next ones, because the state has made the opportunities for them to be there and to help small businesses get their foothold and, you know, have that opportunity to grow the Main Street into more of a little community. But like I say, use the funding for what we can use it for, and I think the return will be there. Like I say, it's just takes a few years and it takes some confidence in ourselves to do it.
Thanks, Bryce.
I agree with what you just said, Bryce. I'm gonna speak from experience. Takes a lot of cups of coffee to sell. You just keep your overhead and do anything to your building. But yet remove that business from your town and have another empty storefront, and where does that take you? It's worth investing.
To draw people in.
Mhm.
Derek Lumsden, Jones County Economic Development. I've heard it a couple of times, so I thought I'd speak to it about we need a plan going down the road, what this plan is. The facade project in and of itself is never going to be that silver bullet that people want to have happen to a community. Some communities do streetscape, hoping that's going to be it. Some people do facades, hoping that's going to be it. Some people take their big white elephant type of building that's been empty for 50 years and think this is going to change our lives if we get this one project done. In reality, that's not how it works. You do one thing, you move on to the next, you move on and you move on. So like Bryce was saying, in this particular instance, you know, using this grant to do the facades, what do you do next? Anamosa is set up for it already, especially in your downtown. The facade project doesn't work on your upper story housing. It doesn't work on your basements to whatever you might want to do. It doesn't work on the interior of your main floors. But you have the state and federal tax credits that Anamosa qualifies for because you're already a historic district. So some of that paperwork and some of those fees are already out of the way that you can work on. You have the upper story housing tax credits that can work, the workforce housing tax credits. You have the catalyst grant. Some of the other towns that he mentioned, you know, or Main Street towns, they have a couple more options of funding, but there are ways to stack this funding and to help business owners and building owners go through some of that revitalization. This, and I think one of the reasons that the facade project is utilized across the state. It gives you that visual kick in the pants. If you don't see something happening, you don't believe it's happening. Anybody can renovate their upstairs, but if you've never been upstairs to see what it looks like before and after, you have no idea what they did because it's hidden from view. The facade project is right out in the open. You see people working on the tuck pointing. You see people working on the storefronts. You see them working on the parapets. You see that work being done, and that gives you some pride. It starts people talking. Even if people aren't happy about some of the changes that are happening, they're talking about it. No news is bad news in this type of an environment. The more you see done, the better it is. I know in both towns I've done facade projects, we had a lot of negative people until after all the projects were done. God, that building does look better. And then other projects happen, whether it's a streetscape project, whether it's a white elephant, you start trickling them down, things can snowball from there. But you've got to take that first step, and like Bryce and even Tom and some of the others said, you've got to keep going. But if you don't take the first step, how are you going to take the next 10? And this gives you that first step opportunity. And over the last 10 years, the state's proven that it is successful. And it's one of the most successful grant programs in the state of Iowa, and there's data to back it up, whether it's from a tax value standpoint, whether it's from renovation standpoints, whether it's from other rehabilitations and businesses coming in. Across the board, it's a successful project. Thank you.
So what is our next step?
To me, hiring Martin Gardner to do the evaluations.
No, after this.
After, if you go through this entire project?
Yeah.
I would say that once you're done with this, then it's talking to some of those building owners that are interested in doing more, whether it's upper story housing, whether, I've got this vacant property, what would be good here? Working with them, okay, you've got a vacant property on the first floor. What's a niche we're missing in Anamosa? What does Anamosa need that would help sell everything else we have here? Because to me, Anamosa is the cultural capital of Jones County. What are some of those things that help sell that cultural bent? And getting some of that data to help them bring in a business like that, do that recruitment. Getting some of those other grants to do upper story housing or renovate the insides. I mean, some of that will be case by case basis, but doing that work now gets people thinking in the mentality, well, now that my building looks like this, maybe I can get a tenant if I did X, Y, and Z. So, I mean, some of the planning we do now can help springboard what's going to happen after this project's done. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks.
So if I were to redo my motion and I would have so many buildings, and then could I add that there would be like a processing fee of say $250 per application? Does that seem reasonable? I think that people could come up with $250 to cover, I mean, over the course of 20 buildings.
Seems fair to me.
Okay, I make the motion, we move forward with Martin Gardner on up to 25 buildings with $250 application fee per application. So if there's 2 buildings for an owner, it'd be $500. Correct? Is that how that would be? It wouldn't be it'd be per building.
It would probably be per building. So they'd probably split that, right?
No,
Do you think
So-
do you think the 250 per owner?
per building, not per owner.
Okay, okay.
Per building. So if one owner owns 2 buildings, their application fee would be $500, $250 for each building.
Right.
So if you've got one owner, it's $250.
Yep. It'd be 2 separate applications.
But is it just $250 for the whole
That's-
building, or
that's not right.
per?
No.
Well, so it's not just per building then.
No, I never said per building. I said per application. So if an owner, okay, so if you own 2 buildings and you application on both buildings, that's $500. That's per building, right? Per application.
Well, you said.
Now, if 2 owners own 1 building and they're separate titles, separate property
Well-
owners, it's separate applications. so that would be $250 per application.
Well, because, I just wanted to clarify,
Right.
because you did say per building.
Right, the application, so if you own 2 buildings, I assume you're doing 2 applications.
Right, but you said
So-
per building, so,
Right. Well, I meant on if you
You-
were owning 2 buildings.
so per owner.
So if you own 1.5 buildings, it's gonna count as 2 applications.
So, first by Betty.
Second.
Second by Rod.
So you're confident with TIF financing this?
I think that's the right approach. I can't guarantee that it's gonna cover our costs. I think either way, there's, even if it doesn't fully come back in the source of property taxes, that this will pay off in other ways, either attracting businesses or attracting residents, residential development, those other things that aren't as easily tracked.
We have some other big expenses coming.
In reviewing our
I
debt
just
situation.
don't want the well to run dry.
So,
In
Please
reviewing
be
our debt si-
sure and confident.
In reviewing our debt
Um,
situation, I'm pretty confident that we are in a good situation to address all of our upcoming capital expenses and borrowings.
Any further discussion?
Kyle, did I hear you state earlier that someone, Monticello is currently looking at the same program?
I didn't say that.
Oh, no, Monticello is looking at becoming part of the Main Street program, not this particular project.
Okay.
But a lot of Main Streets use this project, which is where the confusion may have come.
All right, thanks for clarifying that. Well, you know, it's, obviously Monticello is encouraged happy to be taking on another project to revitalize their downtown. I am aware of other communities that have undergone this, and they are very pleased of the outcome. I would agree that if we stand on the sidelines and do nothing, that's just what we're gonna have is nothing. I do have heartburn taking tax dollars and sticking it into the personal property side. At some point in time, you just may have to do it because other communities are seeing their downtown crumble as well. I just don't wanna be the one sitting here when the ship sets sail out of the harbor and somebody's left to turn all these lights off because we've got no downtown. I'd like to see this through the next step or the next phase. What I feel is critical is the structural integrity of these buildings. That may become a deal breaker.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Carried. 7.5.
Dale, just Mayor, thank everyone for their public opinion.
Moving on, 7.5, discussion and possible action on resolution setting temporary salary for deputy city clerk for added responsibility in absence of city clerk.
I'd like to make the motion to approve the wage increase with a change in the resolution to state, whereas the current city clerk position is vacant as of June 4th, 2019, instead of police chief.
I apologize.
That's what happens, we don't have a city clerk to proofread.
I'll second the motion.
First by Rick, second by Kay. Any discussion? And it's a roll vote.
We will start this vote with Weimer,
Yes.
Crump,
Yes.
Kay Smith,
Yes.
Rod Smith,
Yes.
and Schaefer.
Yes.
7.6, discussion and possible action on payment of bills for the month of
Move
June.
to approve.
First by Betty.
Second.
Second by Rod.
Do we want to separate any of these out?
I think it's probably in the best interest of
I think it
those
is.
that would have conflict.
I would agree that it should be done.
Do you
I
want
need to redo my motion.
I'm asking you.
So, we'll go back then. I was just approving the overall disbursement journal bills. What do you want?
I guess I think it would be best, if we separate two of the bills out, approve the rest as a whole, and then approve those two separately.
Alright, cause I didn't, when I read it yesterday, they're separate.
Is that your motion?
Yes, approve them separately.
Let me try this. I'll make a
Yes,
motion.
I'm like.
I'll make a motion that we separate the two in question, Schaefer Plumbing and Heating and Jones County Economic Development, and pay the remainder of the bills within the pack.
I'll second that.
And then we don't approve the other two at all, or we
We
approve them
will,
separately?
They're
they'll
separate.
approve
They're
them
separate.
separately.
Okay.
And let me just say that I would like to do that at least at this time until we can get clarification from somebody on this.
Like from the auditor?
Well, not necessarily the auditor, but maybe the state.
I spoke to an attorney on this issue, and this was kind of the recommendation on how to proceed, but I can get more information.
And it just may be that there needs to be some clarification on a few things that might be affecting this, but I think for now, let's be safe and do it this way.
So we have a, I think we have a motion in a second.
Yeah, first by Rod, second by Rich. You guys all agree on the bills for once? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I make a motion that we pay the Schaefer Plumbing and Heating bill, as it is in the packet.
Second.
First by Rod, second by Betty to pay the Schaefer Plumbing and Heating bill.
So at this point, do you want me to abstain from this?
That would be my recommendation.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
make a motion that we pay the Jones County Economic Development bill as it was submitted in the packet.
Second.
First by Rod, second by Rich. Pay the economic development bill.
You should abstain.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
So
That's what I was just
if I heard correctly, or understand correctly, Cody abstained for paying the Schaefer Plumbing and Heating bill, and Betty abstained from paying the Jones County Economic Development.
saying. Correct.
Yep. Oh, city administrators report.
Just a couple things. My time has primarily been dominated by the bills and whatnot. I mean, without a clerk, Penny has obviously done a lot of work, and we've also had some help from clerk in Monticello, but it's still a lot of work to pick up, as well as to search for the new clerk, which hopefully will be wrapping up soon. I think we've had some progress on nuisance abatement. Chief Hoyt may be able to give more details, but I guess I'd summarize. I know he's mentioned to me there's been significant improvement on the Boots property, and I know have you made contact with Merritt again?
Yes.
And identified specific things that still need done?
Yes.
So that's kind of the next steps there, as well as other more routine cases. So I think the only thing, that's all I've got.
What,
So.
so what is the game plan? You've met, you've discussed let's advance this ball. Bring you up to speed here.
Referring to the Merritt case, or
Both or all?
I think there's been a deadline. Do you just want to?
Sure. Sure. After visiting with the city attorney last week, I believe, I apologize, I may not be exactly accurate on that, my weeks have kind of ran together as well. He advised that we should approach him and provide exact detail of what needed to be done to be in compliance with the judge's ruling. In fact, when I met with Mr. Merritt, he thought that he was in compliance. So I outlined roughly a three-quarter of a page of things that need to be accomplished. He has stated that he is requesting a week to get the property on Park Avenue completely cleaned up, which is a residential zone property. He currently has his own personal vehicles parked there, so he said he would do that. The front portion of his business that's by Dollar General there, that is all commercial. That is part of his business. It has to be moved within 30 days, as he's essentially the general nature of his work is getting cars, repairing them, moving them out. The one exception to that is there's a feed truck there that's in storage. By law, that's authorized. There's nothing that we can do with that. And then the property over on Mechanic Street, which is also commercial property, not owned by Mr. Merritt. That we have to look into whether or not the owner of the property is willing to put down a proper paved surface to keep the box trucks that are there that are owned by Mr. Merritt. But those box trucks apparently contain mechanics, vehicle and automotive mechanic related parts and pieces that he uses for his business, which is why he uses that storage space as opposed to that by his property. So I have yet to contact that
property owner to see how we need to proceed with that exactly.
So in our junk vehicle ordinance, it is not to be used as storage.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's easy enough to fix, correct?
Yes. The box trucks portion, that's what you're referring to, correct?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
it does state a vehicle is not to be used as storage.
Yes. So it either needs to be the vehicle itself, yes. The box, if he chooses to put boxes there or whatnot, or take them off there, that it has to be still properly paved, excuse me. I have not made contact with that property owner yet. The Boots property absolutely has made significant progress. They are not in compliance with the ordinance as of Friday. I was not able to make contact with them on Friday. They weren't on the property or not reachable, but there definitely has been significant improvement. As soon as I'm able to make contact at that point, I will issue them the notice to abate, which allows them the opportunity to come before this council and either explain why I guess they have not done so yet, and or get extensions or whatever I guess is decided upon this body. So as soon as I make contact, I will issue that.
You had mentioned a 1 week deadline. That's clearly understood by the party.
Yes.
And when is that deadline?
So I have dated it for the date of the next council meeting. Typically, we give the 10 days, and that just so happened to fall on the date of the next council meeting, had it been delivered today. But I did not make contact with them. I don't plan on changing that, though. They'll still have that until the next council meeting.
So his 30 days was up in April,
Yes.
and we just gave him another 10 days.
I'm sorry, I'm referring to the Boots property.
Oh.
So not the same.
Okay,
Yeah. No, the other one.
let's jump over to the, where your 30 days was up, and in April was the end of 30 days, so,
Yeah.
and I hate to beat a dead horse, but here we are, the end of, July, and I can guarantee nothing will be done in July.
So what we found out in investigating that whole thing further was essentially Mr. Merritt was claiming that he believed he had complied with the judge's order. The city attorney thought it best that we meet personally and explain to him what part he had or had not actually complied with, and explain that to him in detail and preferably in writing. I did that last week. At that point in time, he said he would clean the Park Avenue property, which was an obvious and easy requirement. That's residential zone. He cannot be using it the way he was using it. The business portion, again, to the side of Dollar General, some of those requirements he has met. He did clean a large portion of that up, and he can keep his storage vehicles there if he chooses to. Anything that he's bringing in as part of his business, as a repair business, that has to be monitored and moved every 30 days. So it's a matter of just watching and maintaining that he's doing that, in fact. And then the third portion of that property is Mechanic Street, which is something completely different now, knowing that he's storing automotive parts in those vehicles.
So, I'm just thinking, the city attorney, every time he exits his building, can see that property.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
That why why it's taken this long for him to say maybe we need to provide him in writing when he sees it every day. A little questioning of that part of it.
Well, yes, I'm trying to understand, Jeremiah, when the deadlines are up, so cleaning of the park place, it has not occurred yet, correct?
No.
When's the deadline?
I would have to check for sure. I believe I spoke to him on Friday. I'll have to double check for sure. I'm not sure what the day was I spoke to him.
Okay, so if those items are still present, what are you doing? What's your plan the day after the deadline?
At that point in time, it's speaking to the city attorney to file the non-compliance order with him to file with the courts. And that is, I guess in practice, that would be with any of that property at all.
May I make a suggestion that if his deadline is, say, July 31st, and you go and see on July 29th that he's not close to being done, that paperwork be drawn up so it can be taken care of immediately then, as soon as he passes his deadline, instead of waiting for the deadline and then waiting a couple of more days?
Yeah, I can pass that request on. It's, I guess, outside of my office, but I will relay
Hold on.
that. Yeah.
When it's outside of your office, where does it go next?
That's the city attorney's
City
office.
attorney.
Yes.
Does it go through Jacob ever?
Just informational.
Okay.
So I inform him of what I've done.
I just
with
want to
that.
know where it gets lost and where we have to fix it. I
Sure.
understand that you seem to have fairly good follow through with it, but April to basically August, and we're still wasting oxygen talking about it here because we don't have a plan. So
So then I can assume the deadline on the commercial property, that those requirements, if they are not met, you will operate in the same manner.
Yes.
thanks, Jeremiah.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Can we assume that the fire department expansion is moving forward?
I haven't heard from MMS, but as far as I know, they're working on it, doing the preliminary work that they have essentially donated.
I was gonna ask how they were chosen.
They reached out and said we're willing to do the preliminary engineering at our cost. And I thought we had discussed that here, but because that was the issue we were running into was there wasn't an agreement under the prior engineers we were working with to move forward, and they came forward and said, hey, we'll help your project out and cover that initial expense. I mean, there's still the cost of the construction phase, but for the preliminary and the bidding side, I think they're wanting to be they do a lot of work in the community, and I think they want to be supportive. That's
They did work up at the courthouse.
Did we get letters out to other buses?
yes.
So you're done with your report.
I'm done unless there's other questions.
All right, 9.0, mayor and council reports and boards and commissions.
Well, I missed the library report, but Rebecca sent me some information. There's a photo project going on in the state of Iowa that we could become a part of, and I would encourage everyone to check with the library and think about the photos you have that were great-great-grandpas or old buildings that you would like to have online for the whole state to be able to see them.
Yours must be the other one. 10.0, public with business with the council and items not on the agenda.
Tom Bergen, building owner downtown. First off, do the microphones work?
Yeah.
Because I really have a, Dale, you and Jacob, I have a hard time understanding you guys.
They're for the purpose of recording for the audio. They don't there's no speakers. They don't amplify.
Oh, wow, so they're kind of pretties. Okay. I said this before, and I'm gonna bring it up just to start over here again. Roughly around August of 2017, I went to Al Johnson and reported a bypassed water meter. On that day or the next day, I get a knock from the police department. As far as I'm concerned, I was retaliated against on a property that I had. So, Betty, are you familiar with the picture says 1,000 words, that phrase?
Sure.
Jim, did you and the employees take pictures of that bypass water meter and show them to Jacob?
Yes, we took pictures.
Okay. Somebody's a liar, I guess. I don't get this. I've asked you guys, I think it would have been best maybe to just own up and say, geez, there was an issue, let's take care of this, but no. I guess, Betty, what I'm saying is, you're making the city employees, you're making your plumber, you're making me, you're making yourself, and you're making other people just a flat-out liar. And quite honestly, I expect to be retaliated again. So, you know, it's like, I don't get this. You know, you can sit there and smile and lie to me all you want. Because you're pretty good at it. I'll give you that. When there's pictures of this, and you know full well, because we had that conversation, you sit here and you deny this in front of everybody. So I guess the city of Anamosa gets free water if they want it. I don't get it. I mean, at least own up to the fact and say, there was a mistake, let's take care of it. But that would be too easy. I just don't understand how everybody can sit here, you especially, being a council member, and deny this.
Tom, if I can have a moment to speak.
Sure.
I'm interjecting on this line because I don't like this personal attack. And if it was me, if it was Rich or whomever, it doesn't matter who you're directing it at. But this type of attack is not part of the reason this council
But I brought it in front of you guys several times and nothing's been done about it.
Has
And you guys have made rules.
From the time of the notification of this, has the water bill usage changed?
See, that's been checked out, so there was an issue that somebody knew there was something going on, because I know that's been, for a fact, that's been checked out, Rod.
So
Now,
if it was unmetered water, then
the place has been sitting empty since they sold it, so how can you go back and check anything, because there was, until the council or the chamber moved up there? So how can you, but it don't matter. It don't matter. The fact is that there's pictures of it that was done. And I've asked you guys to do something about it. And this isn't an attack. I brought this up several times, and me and you had this conversation. I don't like coming in here aggressive, but you guys there's been rules, that one that Mike Dearborn brought up that you guys dropped. So I'm sitting here talking a couple times, Betty interrupts me, and I tell her, said, I don't remember what the number was, but it's like, no, you can't talk. Dale, let her talk. So you guys, there's been rules made here that you guys seem to break yourselves. So the only way I feel that sometimes you can get stuff across is to come up here and be aggressive. Me and you had this conversation, I don't like doing this, but sometimes you don't have no choice.
I believe
What's
there's
right?
I believe there's other choices.
Well, I turned it in and I got retaliated against, and it's not gonna happen again. You know, it's pretty coincidental that the day I turn it in, the day or the next day, I got Travis McNally knocking on my door. But I think it would have just been, there's an issue, let's take care of it. But no, let's hide behind it. Jacob, you seen it. You threw it up, you swept it right, I asked you at one of the meetings, you swept it right under the rug. Never an investigation, never asked anybody, never talked to anybody, you know, so.
Tom, what would you expect if someone was stealing water? What would you expect after that's found
I
and
would just
corrected?
expect
What
to-
would you expect to occur?
I would expect just
Would
to
you
be
expect their
taken
water
care of.
use to increase?
You know it's not gonna.
Why?
Like I said, you guys have checked
Why?
into this.
Why?
Because when they sold it, the place is set empty. You know it said empty until the chamber moved into that up there. Mary stayed up there, what, of just a handful of times? So you can't judge that water usage like that, Jacob, and you know it.
You would
This is
expect
the
the
most
water
you've
use
ever
to
said, because
increase.
usually you kind of hide behind things and you don't answer.
You would expect the water use to increase, and it didn't.
Not necessarily. Because when no one's living there, it's not gonna increase.
So
What part, that's a pretty easy math to me.
So what I'm understanding is you have no evidence.
You seen the
Picture of
pictures,
the
didn't you?
pipe.
A picture shows a pipe, and
Oh,
and
wow.
nobody's
Wow.
nobody's denying that a pipe existed.
That pipe was
But
always there.
but you have no
Me and you
evidence
had
of
that
what that pipe
conversation
was
in
used
that
for, if
basement.
it was connected to any fixtures.
You know, here it is. Let's just get a bigger broom and sweep it under the rug, because that's
Tell me.
exactly what you're doing, Jacob. You're
I would
sweeping
like to
all
know.
this.
I would like to know so I could do something about it.
I've never seen you this outspoken about anything, because usually you sit there and you're just quiet. Like I said
I would
before,
like to
you've
do
become a
something,
puppet.
but I need something to act on.
You guys showing the pictures? Okay.
I'm not
Wow.
I'm not denying the picture. I just
The
don't.
plumber
I just,
changed it. These guys were there.
I'm not
you're
denying
calling,
the pipe.
You're calling
So-
city employees liars.
No, I'm not.
I think you are.
I'm not
That's
denying
just-
the picture.
So I'm done. So you say what you want, but you, Betty, you know you're wrong. You absolutely. Know
I'm
you're
not
wrong.
saying what occurred because I can't.
Jacob,
Maybe she
you
did,
don't
but
wanna
I
say
don't
what
have
occurred.
anything to act on.
You don't
If you
wanna say
do,
what occurred.
give it to me and I will.
Obviously, yes,
Your
they are.
time's up.
Okay. Give 'em free water, I guess.
Leanna Boone, Chamber Director. I'd just like to thank you guys again for stepping up with the nodes. The streets crew has taken over the watering. They're doing a great job. I've had prison labor twice now to do the weeding. That's gonna continue on a regular basis, and we got yard of the week. So,
Yay.
thank you guys.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work you put in there. Nobody else? 11.0 adjournment.
So motion.
First by Rich, second by Ron. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
He has a crush on me. That's what